Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast, where it's all about helping you unleash your greatness.
Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to yet another Zeducation Podcast. First and foremost, thank you so much once again. I think this is our second podcast for 2022, right, Pasi?
Yep, absolutely. We're excited.
And what better way than to, go into our next podcast or this current podcast with the topic that's so dear to our heart, and it's cultural competency in education. Before we start off, we wanted to spice it up a little bit now of our podcast, and we want to bring up or introduce a quote every time we do a session. So today, I have the privilege of doing that, and I want to share with each and every one of you a whakatauki. So it's called a Maori proverb that I typically will share with learners in many of my sessions. So I'll say it in Maori and then I'll say it in English. Te tiro atu, tō kanohiki, tai rāwhiti, ana te rāwhiti, te rā ki te ata-ata ka hingi ki muri ki a koe. Turn your face to the sun and the shadows fall behind you. This whakatauki or proverb encompasses to me personally, Pasi, optimism, looking forward with hope, knowing that regardless of what's happened in the past within your life and within your current context, that there will always be something to look forward to and to grow and progress towards.
I love that. I love that whakatauki. It's very appropriate, especially with everything that's gone on last year, this year with the pandemic, or whatever challenges that you're going through personally in your life. Always know that there's always light at the end of the tunnel. There's always hope, okay? And it is most of the time a matter of perspective. And it's also about action as well. It's about seeing the light, and it's about moving towards the light as well. So very, very appropriate. Thank you for sharing that today, Kalolo. We're very excited. This podcast today, as Kalolo mentioned earlier, is about cultural competency in education. Okay, especially with Indigenous views. So let's get into our podcast.
Yeah. So just thinking practically here, right? Like you have teachers that will go into a teaching setting and they will have learners of diverse cultures and backgrounds. And you can be the best teacher in the world and understand how to tie back to learning objectives, have the greatest activities and be able to help people achieve the best assessments. But we are talking particularly how you can embed cultural competency that helps people connect more in the teaching space. So let's get into the swing of things, Pasi. Maybe you can define to us what culture is to you.
Yep. So I guess for me personally, culture is more than just a song and a dance, how people mostly see it. There's a lot more behind the scenes. It's the ideas, it's the customs, it's the behaviors, it's the beliefs, it's the value systems that those particular people or society have. So in my opinion, that is what culture is. And it's also about culture, like some people have their own way of doing math from their perspective. Or they might have their own view of science and how they view the world from a cultural perspective.
And I remember in sociology, I majored in sociology at university many years ago, and I remember doing a paper on culture, particularly subcultures. And I was taught and ingrained in my mind that the word culture is probably one of the most complex words to define in the English dictionary. Why? Because like you said, Pasi, it's like the ideas, the customs, the social behaviors of different groups of people. It could be gangs, it could be cultures from different countries. It just gets very complicated. However, in this instance, what we're saying here is learners have their own backgrounds, their own ways of seeing their worldviews, and how do you embrace that and have that level of competency to embrace that in the teaching space, which I absolutely love.
Because I think it's important to also mention as well that, things like age, life experience, all of those are factors that you need to consider as well in terms of cultural diversity. There's cognitive diversity, how people think differently. We could be looking at the same problem and approach it from different perspectives to help solve it, right? And that could be influenced by the way that we were raised, the traditions, or the things that we believe in. So, we don't want to get too complex here, just to keep it really simple, especially for this podcast.
And to provide real practical ways where perhaps some of you guys are teachers. Well, we're all teachers in many ways, but how you can apply this in your everyday life. So why is it so important in education and in the workplace to embed cultural competencies? I think to break that question down is to understand some of the key values that tie back to particularly Māori and Pasifika communities. So I'm going to share with you some of these values that are very important to them. So what are values? These are things that mean or matter the most to people within their hearts and their minds. So for Pasifika communities, some of the key things that we've learned as we've gone to a workshop and learned this from Leva, which is a non-profit organization that helps Pasifika communities from a health and well-being perspective. But I think it also touches base to us as well in this particular context. So some of the values that Pasifika thrive through is reciprocity, spirituality, culture, love, service, respect, collectivism, and family. For Māori, and we will lean more towards our experiences, especially teaching for Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, is some of the values that they have embedded in their company as an organisation, but also in the teaching space, which we've learnt a lot from as well. So some of the values that Māori learners embrace or thrive from is manakitanga, so it's hospitality, whanaungatanga, relationships and bringing the family setting into the teaching space, kaitiakitanga, so guardianship, and kotahitanga, so a sense of unity when it comes into the workspace as well. These are some of the core values that connect learners to the topics that we teach them in the training space. So why is it important in education in the workplace? It is to help learners to connect to their lives and to the topic that's been taught to them at hand.
And it does require compassion and empathy to be able to understand and connect with who they are and where they're coming from. It really does take a bit of empathy and compassion. And so, this is how education approaches adult education. We don't come in and try and teach them something new or try and give them greatness. We help build upon what they already know, help them build upon who they already are and already believe in. So, this would lead perfectly into our next part of this podcast, which is to talk about, how can you be culturally competent? So let me give you an example, okay? And we want to give examples of how we do it here as education, or particularly from me and Kalolo's perspective and experience, to hopefully give you some ideas that are practical for you to go away and apply straight away. So I guess for me, we think about the value, and you can see there's always a connection or always a similarity with Maori and Pasifika values, right? If you really understand it, you can definitely identify the patterns there. One, for example, is respect, right? Respect. And, and how do we show respect and generosity in terms of a learning environment? So it could be just as simple as facilitating a discussion where everyone has a voice. We think about Pasifika and Maori, like we don't talk over each other when people are in gatherings or important meetings, family or whatever the special occasion. Normally, there's one person that speaks at a time, and normally it's the leader who has the last say as well. But that leader builds upon what everyone else says. That's the same principle that we apply here as education. So we facilitate a discussion where everyone has a voice. So when one person speaks, everyone listens, and everyone, feels safe enough to be able to express their ideas and what they believe in, their values, no matter what culture they are. And we avoid trying to debate with what they say and focus more on validating what they say. because it's about hearing what they say, understanding, and then building upon it. So don't debate, validate. So that's understanding people's different opinions, why they said it, why it means so much to them, and then building upon that.
Yeah. That kind of skill set is applicable to anything outside of just cultural competency. But in this lens, it's listening and knowing that some of the conversations that Māori and Pasifika will bring out will always relate back to their life stories and to their family, and embracing that, right? So it's having that empathetic lens. And that also includes other ethnicities, right? Whether you're of European descent, if you're Chinese, if you're from Middle Eastern countries, wherever, right? It's connecting the dots and knowing that you embrace and respect people's points of view, which is awesome. So maybe what we could do is share 3 tips, or what we want to do is share 3 tips with you on how you can apply a level of cultural competency right now in the training space, or whatever you're doing when it comes to teaching within your personal lives. So tips of being culturally competent. First tip that we want to share with you is, and in Māori they refer to it as whakawhanaungatanga. So whakawhanaungatanga, whaka means to do, whanaungatanga is build relationships or relationships. So to build relationships from the get-go is to have each learner introduce themselves to others, where they're from, and what makes them want to come to class in the first place. I can tell you right now, based on the experience, that having a whakawhanaungatanga session embedded in your lesson plans will help create an icebreaker and help people become very open faster than any icebreaker activity that you can ever have.
I love that. And, that's a great opportunity during those introductions when you hear people introduce themselves to really understand a little, get a little insight into what their culture is, because some of them might express what those values are or what really matters most to them in life and what's their why, right? And I guess you can get an understanding of their thinking and perspectives as well during those introductions. And, being thoughtful about how you manage the introduction as well. I mean, it could be as simple as like, what's your name? Where are you from? That's a little bit open, so people can just express where they're from. And some of them might go into their whakapapa, And so, think about how you frame up those introductory activities as well. I think my tip here, moving into the second tip, is we have a framework here as education called STAR. It's an acronym. And it's an acronym that helps our educators become culturally competent. And I'm not going to get into it too much, but S STAR, the acronym, S stands for stories, T stands for tools or techniques, and then A stands for application, or applying what they learn, and then R is reflect and review. But I'm only going to talk about the stories. Stories are important, very helpful when you're facilitating learning with Pasifika and Maori people. I mean, if you think about our ancestors, like no one really recorded anything on pen with pen and paper, right? A lot of it was passed on, information or genealogy, right? Information was passed on in the form of stories. The great thing about stories is it's easier to pass on, it's easier to remember, and it helps because Pasifika and Maori people are very visual people. And so when you share stories, they can visualize in their mind what you're saying or what you're teaching. And it makes it a little bit more tangible.
I love that. Very, very important. And we have a plethora of different experiences where people feel so valued when they come into a virtual physical class, knowing that they can share where they're from and have that level of mana or pride as they do so. Just a bit of a caveat to this topic for those teachers that will be teaching people more than say 30 plus, maybe even 100 plus. I did a session last week on 200 for around 200 people. But if it's a much larger audience, think of ways where you can still embed in whakawhanaungatanga, right? Maybe you split them off into groups and have them introduce themselves into mini groups. Or if you're doing it on Zoom, tell them to write down in the chat box where they're from, so everyone else can feel and build that rapport as well. So there are ways where you can be creative in introduction of whakawhanaungatanga in the training space. So that's the first tip. So the second one is embedding in spirituality. So adding in karakias, right, into the training space. We've noticed that, we live in a whenua, or in a land where having a karakia timatanga and a karakia whakamutunga, so closing karakia and an opening karakia, is crucial in making sure that you open and close effectively any topic that you're discussing in the training space.
Yeah, for sure. And, you might not be religious yourself, but it's important to acknowledge the spirituality of others. That is being very inclusive. So, if you are not familiar with spirituality yourself, I definitely recommend and encourage you to do a bit of research, doing a bit of get to know the culture by maybe, if you've got friends or family who are maybe, that particular culture, or, ask them questions like, how do you guys do things? Why do you do it that way? And the whole purpose is to be able to leverage what you learn by being self-aware of the culture, and then being able to leverage that in the learning environment with your adult learners, right? So that's what we recommend in terms of, if you don't know spirituality or familiar with that culture's spirituality, do a bit of homework.
Yeah. And it's one of those key values that are embedded in both Māori and Pasifika communities, right? I'll give you an example. So I went on the session, one of New Zealand's biggest digital companies that teach educational courses, digital educational courses. Very forward-thinking company, all about embracing diversity and inclusion. But what I absolutely love is in this virtual session of, I think there were about 400 people on this Zoom session from all parts of New Zealand and Australia. We still started off with a karakia and ended off with a karakia, because they understand and recognize that it is part of cultural competency to embed that, acknowledging that we are here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that meant a lot to me, just seeing that and just seeing other people know. If you're not spiritual, right? If you're not a spiritual individual, just know that prior to colonization, when Christianity was introduced all over Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, there was still spirituality in these cultures. And it's the alignment was something greater than them. And I think that's the most important part, is just knowing, is you're aligning yourself and acknowledging something that is beyond you in the beginning and the end of every session. So yeah, start off with a karakia. There are a lot on YouTube. You can go on Google. We live in an age of in the internet where you can just write down opening karakia or closing karakia. However you wish to do it, make sure you embed that in. And then the last tip, or the third tip, there's many tips we want to focus on, but we know that sharing 3 is just the sweet spot. So the third thing that you can embed in that'll help you become culturally competent in the training space is manakitanga. So what is manakitanga? It's to be hospitable. And I say this from a Maori and Pasifika lens, even though I said a Maori term, is food, right? I'll give you an example. So I have taught over 10 classes or over 200 students for Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. And one thing I've realized statistically, a lot more students come to class when I embed in refreshments throughout my 20-week course back in the days. So instead of just like, okay, come to class just to come to class, having little treats, and even having like every 4th week, having each individual bring a plate, that adds in this level of hospitality that we're coming to connect outside of the training environment and to get to know each other separately. And that's what I absolutely love. It's not just about food, Māori Pasifika, we're all about food, but it's connecting and using that as a vessel for added connection outside of the training space.
Yeah, hey, if you think about it, almost any gathering or special occasion where you for Pasifika and Maori, there's always going to be some sort of food, right? The food is more than what Kalolo said there. It's more than just satisfaction. It's about connection. And you think about times where, maybe at a family dinner table with family, it's a good time, it's a good space for everyone to relax, to connect, to talk. It just feels safe, right? That is what that is the type of environment that gets cultivated when there's food and a bunch of Pasifika and Maori people around the table. And it's all about connection.
I remember reading an article once where someone, an academic article that said, let's not talk about cultural competency. We need to make people feel culturally safe in an environment. So that's one perspective. You know, many people can argue, well, no, cultural competency. But yeah, I mean, that's a lens. Like you said, the word safety, it's making people feel safe of acting themselves, bringing their true selves to the teaching space, which is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll probably see this especially if you've got cultural learners or staff, that level of reciprocity where they maybe like to give back and in the form of food. So there's always this, food is also used as a gift. It is about connection. It is about giving gifts, but at the end of the day, it's about relationships. It's about cultivating those relationships.
Yeah.
Right? And food is the best way to really get people to, I guess, like you, but also just nurture that relationship that you have. Like, if you think about now, like me and Kalolo, like every now and then, mum and dad will come and visit, but they won't come empty-handed. They'll come with like food.
Yeah. How dare they not come with food, right? How dare they?
It's like, what do you want us to bring? That's always the question when they plan to come over. But yeah, it's definitely a part of the culture. It's more than just, eating food, having a good time. It's about connection. It's about relationship.
Yeah. What's really funny, guys, and we'll share this last story before we finish, is when we started education, we started getting all these opportunities to train Māori Pasifika in the workplace and in communities. We always embedded a level, like in our budgets, when we forecasted our budgets for each project, a level of food embedded in it as well, which is really, really funny. But we know, because we're Māori Pasifika-led organisation, we knew that straight from the get-go that we needed to embed that in to connect more with our learners. So to go back to the 3 tips that we wanted to share with you around cultural competency. Number 1, make sure you embed in some kind of introduction that allows for learners to tell you where they're from and why they're in this course. Number 2, spirituality. Not from the traditional spirituality that we're referring to right now that is heavily from a Christianity perspective, although that is a massive part of many Māori and Pacific communities. It's more to do with the spirituality and karakia to help align whatever topic that you're embedding into your class, beginning and end. And last but not least is manakitanga, or hospitality, how you embed in things such as food to make sure you connect with your learners as well. Very practical things, but we know, based on our experiences, these 3 things have made our classes much more successful.
And, thank you for wrapping that up, Kalolo. We would love to end this podcast the same way that we started it, and that is to come back to the whakatauki that Kalolo shared earlier. And, it's about having optimism, having hope, looking towards and moving towards the light. So no matter what challenges you're going through personally right now, no matter what trial, or think about the biggest trial that you've ever experienced in your life, that is nothing compared to who you are and what you can achieve.
Awesome. Well, hey, guys, thank you so much for listening. Hope you're able to take 1 or 2 things from the session and go out and unleash greatness.